UCB Life Issues with Paul Hammond.
And a very warm welcome, as always, to this week's Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond. And you know the parable of the banquet? You know, the one where everybody was too busy to attend. I have bought a plot of land, I need to go and see it. I have bought some oxen, I need to go and try them out. Yeah, all of that sort of loads of excuses why they couldn't come. And then the master of the feast said to his servant, go out into the highways and the byways, the hedges and so on and so forth, and find whoever and bring them in. Who do you think that they brought in? It was the outcasts, wasn't it? The poor, the rough sleepers, the addicts, the awkward, the socially inept. And I wonder how many of that strata of society are in our churches today. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting it's all the church's fault, because the truth is that for many, I don't know, how do we describe them? Misfits, outcasts. For many such people, trying to fit into a standard church service, that's just never going to work, is it? What they actually need is a place of grace that is more like, well, a cocktail of an AA meeting and a casualty department. That's the description that's been given to the church that my guest tonight leads. It's called Zach's Place. It's in Swansea. But how do you go from being virtually too shy to speak in public to becoming a biker leader dealing with the heartache and tragedy of what some would view as the detritus of society, but are actually people that Jesus loves? Well, that's the story of Sean Stillman and a life and a ministry that brings Jesus to the highways and the byways when perhaps the church is too preoccupied with its own business. Sean, welcome to UCB.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate the invitation.
Let's start with you, because your book is called God's Biker. It's published by SPCK, Motorcycles and Misfits. And you started by sharing a very powerful experience that you had at Zach's Place. How long have you been at Zach's Place now?
Zach's Place has been going 20 years now, since we first began in the bars in Swansea City Centre.
And you have your own building now.
Yep.
And moving it out of the pubs into your own building was a very important thing for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, because we'd accumulated that many people who were either in recovery of their alcohol addiction or who needed to be in recovery. So whilst the pub had been the best place to meet people initially, it wasn't the best place to disciple people long term. So we took on an old Brethren Gospel Hall, actually, which had closed in the city centre, and that's been our base for pretty much the last 15 years.
And you get to your Bible study on a Tuesday night, but also to your other gatherings, you get an interesting mix of people. And this book that tells your story, and we'll unpack some of your personal story in a moment. So I picked it up and I started to read it. And I read a review on the back of it that said, this is raw, gut-wrenching, keep a box of tissues to hand as you read it. And I thought, oh yeah, I've read these before. And I opened up and started to read it. And first chapter, you start with the story of Jenny. It puts the whole of what you do into immediate context. Incredibly powerful. I actually found the need to go away and read it somewhere else where people couldn't see me after I started that. Tell us that story, and let's start with the nub of what you're about. Okay,
well, you kind of have to picture the scene as we gather for Bible study. Not rocket science, just good old-fashioned open the scriptures together in a fairly small room on old chairs around some old pub tables. And it's a mixture of people from right across society. But we've always got some of our friends who are sleeping rough and battling with addictions who are part of our community. And they take an active part in the Bible study and the discussion, take opportunity to share their story. And but every now and again, the heavy red steel door that goes right out onto the street from the room we meet in will just bang open. And we're never quite sure who or what is going to fall through the door. And on this occasion, the door banged open, and a particularly chaotic young lady came in. It was someone we knew really well, and she'd had a bad day. Someone that morning had woken her up by throwing a bucket of water over her from the doorway that she'd been sleeping in. Been sleeping rough for 7 or 8 years. She'd had a bad day in court. Someone had pinched her phone. She got thrown out of neighbouring church and their free church lunch. She didn't manage to stay long enough for that before getting kicked out. And she turned up to us in the evening on a real mission to cause as much destruction as she possibly could.
Yeah.
And just a couple of weeks before that, she'd been shouting in my face at the soup kitchen, "How can God love me? Look at the state of me." I mean, she used language a little bit more colourful than that, but that was her question. It was coming from right within a core of her soul, really. And she just descended into the middle of the room in chaos. And normally I'm reasonably good at steering a discussion, but I'd lost it. Didn't know what to do. And one of my colleagues went out into the kitchen, and he re-emerged a moment or two later as Jenny was shouting and screaming at everybody on this chair, and he came back with a bucket of water. And you can imagine the expression on Jenny's face, thinking, "Oh no, not again."
Now, there's an interesting point you make in telling the story in the book, and it is that while many people would have kind of thought he's got the bucket of water to throw it over her and so on, Zach's Place has a philosophy that meant that was never going to happen, doesn't it?
That's right. It's level ground with an open door and a welcome to anybody and everybody.
And nobody is ever going to be humiliated.
No. Humiliation is not on the agenda whatsoever. So she will have known coming in that this was a safe space, but there would have been that moment of doubt.
Yes.
From what happened earlier in the day, and but instead of throwing a bucket of water over her, Glenn he knelt at her feet, and he asked her if he could bathe her feet, and she agreed, and he removed her trainers, which were falling apart. He removed her socks, and for anybody that knows anything about sleeping rough in this country through the winters will know that trench foot didn't die out in the First World War. And you take someone's sock off, it's not just the sock that comes off, but rotting flesh as well. And the stench is horrendous. But Glenn gently bathed her feet with his bare hands in this warm soapy water. And I've never seen someone's demeanour change so much. And she sat back in the chair, tipped her head backwards, and she started singing the old Sunday school song, "Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me." And I thought, this is probably a good time to end our gathering.
Yeah.
Somebody said, "Oh, we didn't get very far tonight, did we, with the Bible study?" And somebody else said, "Well, actually, when you're watching, I think we got to heaven."
Yeah.
And Jenny left our gathering that night with her arms around two friends, still as drunk as anything, singing at the top of her voice, walking down the road, singing, "Jesus loves me, this I know."
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks later, the newspaper headlines ran with the story that a woman had been found dead near the station in the street, and it was our Jenny. And it made the headlines not because a rough sleeper had died.
No.
Unfortunately, there'd been several street deaths in that time, but it made the headlines because she'd been lying there all afternoon, and people had been stepping over her or walking around her. And it took a long time for us to be able to be in a position to have a funeral for her because of the toxicology tests and everything. And we tracked down her father, and I met with a deeply gracious, beautiful man who was just always been longing for his little girl, although she was now 40 years old. He just wanted his little girl to come home. And as we were making the funeral arrangements, he said, "I don't want too much religious stuff. I don't want no hymns or anything like that." And I said, "That's fine. That's fine. We can work around that. That's not a problem." And he said, "But I would like us to sing one song." And he said, and I said, "What's that?" And he responded, he said, "I'd like us to sing 'Yes, Jesus loves me.'" So my automatic response was, "Oh, you heard what happened at Zach's Place a few weeks ago then?" And he hadn't. And his response just staggers me still, many, many years on. He said, "The reason I want us to sing 'Yes, Jesus loves me' is because that's the song I used to sing her to sleep to when she was a little child every night." And it just blows me away that amidst all the madness and the chaos and the darkness and confusion and pain and heartache of Jenny's life, somewhere in the middle of all that muddle, there was the faintest shred of faith.
Yeah.
To have faith to believe that God could still possibly love her. And she was questioning that 2 weeks before. She shouted and screamed at me, how could God possibly love her? But I think she experienced something of God's love in the gentle hands of a stranger bathing her feet.
And you see, that is the power. For those of us that are involved in church, for those of us that are familiar with the Bible, what Glenn did that night, of course, was very, I mean, it was evocative. It was what Jesus did with his disciples. But that wouldn't necessarily have been something that Jenny would have been familiar with. It wouldn't necessarily have been something that she connected with. And yet the power of that, just to spark that flicker of faith.
Yeah. But of course, it was something very practical that would have felt fantastic for her.
Yes.
Because her feet would have been in pain and dirty and grubby and sore, and it made that was the best possible thing that somebody could have done for her at that moment in time, and it had a profound impact. You know, not just on Jenny in those moments, but on our community. You know, we 200 of us gathered to say goodbye to Jenny at a funeral, and we all sang "Yes, Jesus Loves Me," and we told the story. For Glenn, that had a massive impact because, you know, he just followed a hunch.
Yeah.
And he's kind of left with, well, what if I hadn't have done that?
Yeah.
But he's glad he did, and he actually he was over from Australia to help us for a year and stayed 3 years with his family, and he's gone back to Australia and set up similar projects there. It had a massive impact on him and on our little community, just that simple act of caring.
So how does the lad who is too shy to actually speak up in public end up running a church that is connecting with people on such a beautiful level, although the use of the word church there has to be taken in its broadest sense, doesn't it? Because I think many people tourists wandering into Zach's place because of this book aren't necessarily going to recognise church as church there, are they?
No, not at all. No, that's where the AA meeting or casualty department comes in.
Yeah. So, but how did you get there? I mean, what was it that took your journey to that point?
It's a bit bizarre, but it's also very ordinary. You know, I'm a preacher's kid. I'm a preacher's kid that survived. And my faith has always been very real. But it wasn't until my late teens and early 20s I began to explore the Sermon on the Mount. I began to get a handle on what the Beatitudes were. And I was staggered that I'd gone through my whole church experience and I couldn't actually recall a single Bible study series on the Beatitudes, which was the first stuff that Jesus taught his mixed bag of oddball mates before they hit the road. And it staggered me, and this blew my world apart. I was in a position to have someone explain all this to me. I revisited in a fresh new way the stories in the Gospels of Jesus on the road with his friends. And time again, the stories that we find there is not Jesus just tripping over someone that was having a hard time. There's stories like Legion, the naked madman living in the graveyard next to the pig farm.
Yeah.
And Jesus diverted across the lake to deliberately go and see him, the last place a Jewish teacher would go.
Yes.
A naked madman next to a pig farm.
Yes.
You know, it broke all the...
When you put it like that,
it broke all the rules.
Yes.
There was every reason for Jesus not to do it. There was every reason for him not to talk to the woman at the well. There was every reason for him not to go anywhere near lepers. And it just the stories just stack up one after the other. Jesus seemed to deliberately choose to move to the margins, and on the margins there were signs of life which there wasn't anywhere else. And it was also in that Zach's place takes its name after Zacchaeus. Jesus went to Zach's place.
Yes.
And it was those those considered to be the most righteous in the community really struggled with that.
Yeah.
Well, why is he hanging out with these people? And these stories just sort of exploded in my soul, really. And I thought, okay, I follow Jesus. I believe all this stuff. I want to give my life and serve and follow Jesus. And this is where it's taken me. And you know, my character is I'm deeply introverted. I'd rather, you know, if I'm at a party, I'll be by the door. Or I'll find a quiet corner to talk to people. I'm not going to be the loudest person at the bar. But when there's a mark of being an introvert. Sometimes you can exhibit extrovert tendencies when you're passionate enough about something. I couldn't get up on a stage and talk about anything else other than the Lord, to be honest. And it compels me to do what could be seen as a really dumb thing sometimes. But that rediscovery of the Gospels on the road with Jesus just transformed my faith. And so when I felt a call into mission work, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was going to be to the margins. And initially I was drawn to the bike scene, motorcycle clubs. I was into my motorcycles, have been since my mid-teens. And it just became a natural environment for me to go to, because I knew most of these guys in motorcycle clubs were not going to go anywhere near a church. And then it was actually off the back of guys coming to know the Lord from the bike scene who were struggling to fit into church that we actually began to explore with what a mission church would look like in Swansea when I moved to my wife's home city 22 years ago, because we were heartbroken with those that were coming to faith but weren't really connecting in a local church situation. So we wanted to do something about that.
So what is it about Zach's Place that enables the outcasts, the marginalised, to function and bloom? And there are some sad stories where it doesn't happen. It's not everybody who walks through the door is transformed into an angel of perfection. But what is it about your environment that lets those who would not be comfortable, even if they were accepted in traditional church, lets them explore the journey of faith?
I think we've created something where we've always wanted to make it level ground. Right from the beginning, from when we started gatherings in a bar.
You've used that phrase twice now. I think you just need to unpack it a little bit for us.
I think that we can have a tendency of looking at people and decide who's more together than somebody else. I grew up in an evangelical church environment, and you can slip into this idea that the people at the front have got it more together than everybody else. You've got this idea that their kids have probably got self-cleaning teeth, and everything works perfectly, and there's no dramas. But the older I get, and the more and more time I spend with so many different sorts of people, including church leaders and pastors, I know that we're all broken. We're all a bit wobbly. You don't have to scratch too far beneath the surface to find our own doubts, our own fears, and our own struggles. And so we've just been upfront. We're upfront with that with people at Zach's Place. We're not pretending to be any more perfect than anybody else, those of us that are leading the community. So this level ground but it's also a place of learning. So I guess it wasn't until I'd finished writing the book, and as I was reflecting back on it, I thought all of my major learning points, some of the stuff I've learnt about God the most, has not been in the company of the great and the good and the powerful. It's actually been sat alongside the weakest and the broken. So level ground actually creates the opportunity to sit down alongside with people and learn from each other, from each other's stories. So we always allow the room to breathe in whatever context that is, whether that be sharing a meal, whether it's studying the Bible. There's always interaction, so it's not just a straight sermon where nobody can respond. I find it quite strange now if I'm speaking in another church environment and there's no feedback coming. I want someone to heckle. I want someone to say, hang on a minute, I don't agree with that. And but by allowing the room to breathe, people tell their stories, but they only tell their stories when they feel safe. So you've got to create that secure environment where people feel comfortable, and that takes time. I mean, I remember one situation, another Tuesday night, the red door bangs open, and there's two people, a couple, stood in the doorway, both wearing these white paper forensic suits. And they said, oh, Sean, they've just let us out of the police station. We think we're going to be charged with attempted murder. They've taken all our clothes, so we've got nothing on under these suits. Can I have some clean pants and a cup of tea, please? And this was just in the middle of the Bible study. And of course, we invited them in. We knew them well. While we continued the Bible study, someone was sorting out some clothes for them and getting them some food. But for me, the most powerful part of that story is the fact that they were prepared to just open the door and announce to everybody just how vulnerable they were at that moment in time. And they felt
it's phenomenal.
They felt safe enough to do that.
Because I've been in churches where people have been members of the church for years, decades, their whole lives, and wouldn't feel that safe.
Yeah, and it's so you've got to but you've got to have that intention to make it that safe. And for me, that has all been shaped by the gospel narratives. That has all been shaped by just immersing myself in in Jesus' ministry on the road, and just how did he interact with people? Who was the weakest brother or sister in that particular conversation, and how did he respond to them? And also it's important to note how he interacted with the religious leaders. He never criticised their enthusiasm or for the amount of knowledge they had. He questioned their motives and their hearts. But I'm always challenged by his words of initial righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees. You're not going to get a handle on what I'm on about. And asking his mates to be more righteous than the Pharisees would have seemed ridiculous, because how could anybody be more righteous than that? But so there was obviously a way of understanding the gospel and living as a follower of Jesus that was greater than the righteousness of the Pharisees. And sometimes, even with all the best will in the world within our church communities, we can give off the signals that we are more righteous than somebody else. Yes. But I come back and sort of say, well, actually, are we?
And one of the things that struck me, reading the chapter on Zach's place in the book, and by the way, the book is called God's Biker, and we'll come to why it's called that in a moment or two, and it's written by Sean Stillman, my guest today, published by our friends at SPCK. The misfits, motorcycles and misfits, the subtitle. You include people like artists in that.
I do.
And I know you have penned the odd poem yourself, but it's interesting to me why you highlight the creative mind can find it really hard to fit in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's true of church as much as anywhere else.
I made a deliberate choice to advocate the role of the artist in this book, because I think artists have had a raw deal. I think artists are very, very complex people. I've got my wife is a very creative person. Two of my 4 children are very creative as well. I have a background. I love music and the arts, but there is an edge an artistic person has, which is often misunderstood within the church. An artist will often pick up on moves within a culture and moods within a culture where there's anger, where there's angst, where there's protest needs to happen. The artist will pick up on that way before anybody else.
That's why sometimes they're seen as angry people.
I mean, punk is a great example of that. And
we showed our age there. You realise that, don't you? Move on quickly.
What age of people that are listening? And and in my experience, the artists in the church environment, they're the ones that come up with these mad hatter ideas. Whether it be in terms of mission or how to harness all this creative energy and use it, and everybody's horrified. But the artists have got a tender way of looking at the world with almost a prophetic edge. But often we don't listen to that, because often the artists will be the chaotic ones. Yeah. They'll be the ones whose language doesn't always agree with the rest of our language. They might drop the odd naughty word. They might struggle in keeping some of their relationships together. They might be just a little bit more crazy. But we shouldn't dismiss their voice and their desire to seek the truth in the world because of that. And so I've got a very special relationship with a whole bunch of songwriters and artists. I love the Beatitudes, and we commissioned 8 pieces of work purely based on the Beatitudes, and they're powerful. But these are virtually all done by artists who were not generally taken seriously within their own church environments. They're considered to be a bit too
It's a
too on
tragedy,
the edge.
Isn't it?
It is.
That we have such incredible talent and perceptive insight, and yet because is it as simple as it doesn't fit our square box? They are oddly shaped pegs that we're trying to put into a round
I think
hole.
so. And I can remember growing up, my church environment when I was a kid. The only artwork that would ever be allowed anywhere near the walls of a church would be if it had a Bible verse tacked onto it, and that would make it okay. And it's a crying shame, So if, for example, we've as part of our Beatitudes Commission, we've got a piece based on "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted," and it's a full life-size body cast of somebody, a woman sat at a table in mourning, and in the back of her is a chest of drawers, wooden drawers, which you can slide out, and all in these drawers are all things that in her life that she might have mourned over.
Powerful.
Trinkets and
yes.
and this it's a striking piece of artwork. All 8 pieces are. They're all very different by 7 different artists, and some churches won't go near them. And I've tried to get them in theology colleges, and they just can't get their heads around them. And I just think it's a crying shame that this powerful voice we have at our disposal within the arts is not used. So I think we're missing something, and we need to nurture our artists, and we need to give them voice. So thanks for picking up on that. I appreciate that. And I'm, as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about that.
Just
as well.
a bit. But then you are, I think, quite passionate about a whole host of things, because one of the other things about Zach's Place, and perhaps one of the main reasons that Zach's Place is able to function in the way it does, is because it's also the chapter house, the clubhouse of the South Wales chapter of God Squad.
That's right.
Now, you were, and I'm checking my notes here, you were, I understand, the founding UK president of God Squad. You've been the European president as well. You were also the international vice president, and so on and so forth. You've stepped back from some of that now because of your work at Zach's Place, and you're now the president of the Welsh chapter. That's right, isn't
That's
it?
right.
I'm getting all these right, because I want to get these right, because I know it's important, and I want to show respect in that, because God Squad isn't just the sort of group of guys getting together to ride bikes around and say we're Christians who ride bikes. You are a proper subculture relevant, serious, back-patched motorcycle club.
That's right. And
people are going, what on earth does that mean? Unless, of course, they're of a certain age and they've seen a bit of Sons of Anarchy.
That's right. So God Squad is a specific lay mission movement. It's a motorcycle club that has coming on for a 50-year history internationally. It began in Australia out of the Jesus movement days out there. We've been established in the UK since 1995 after serving several years as an apprenticeship. We've now grown throughout Europe. It's one of the maddest mixes of people you will find on this planet in lay mission. We've got people involved from just about every denomination you can think of, including the Eastern Orthodox, where we've got chapters out in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe. We've got Pentecostals, Anglicans, Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, you name it. It's a wonderfully flavoured casserole of flavours. But at its heart, we're a motorcycle club that's organised in regional chapters, and our mandate is to serve in a mission role and a chaplaincy capacity our non-believing friends in motorcycle clubs. And it's
by motorcycle clubs, and I know we're being careful about the language we use here, because I know a big thing of how God Squad has got established, and also of your philosophy, is that we want to show due respect to people who are committed to the culture and the lifestyle of these motorcycle clubs. But we are talking the motorcycle clubs which in the main would have, by ordinary members of society, would have a very low opinion, would be treated with suspicion. There would be thoughts about crime and so on, because they're not what you might call respectable, darling.
That's absolutely right. We're talking about a subculture that chooses to live by its own rules.
Yes.
Somewhat removed from mainstream society, although all the guys will be working and have families like everybody else, but they play by their own rules, and they're identified by wearing what we call a set of colours, their club emblem on their backs. And these aren't just handed out. These are earned over a period of maybe 3 or 4 years. And they become a tribal identity. And these guys are so committed to their clubs and what they believe that at its most extreme, they would be prepared to die for what they believe.
Yes.
It's that kind of level of commitment. You've got a lot of guys come into these clubs who've come out of the armed forces. They're organised in a very structured way, with very clearly defined disciplinary processes by codes of officers and how they're organised. But at its heart, despite what you might read in the press, despite what you might pick up from programs like Sons of Anarchy, where there might be a shred of truth.
No, it's all right, Sean. We know that's...
There's...
Yes.
But at its heart is a desire for ordinary blokes to belong to a tribe.
Yes.
And sometimes that tribe goes wrong, and and there's stuff that goes on which is far different to what I would expect to behave like. But it's a long way removed from a Christian lifestyle. But bizarrely, for us as God Squad and as a Christian motorcycle club, we found enough common threads to weave relationships with our friends in these clubs.
See, that's the thing, though. I mean, surely, all right. So we're talking about the subculture. I think we've identified what sort of grouping it is we're talking about. Now, there are a lot of people who are going, yeah, look, I can understand you wanting to reach a mission to such a great. But why on earth do you want to form or link with? Because it started in Australia, didn't it? Why do you want to form your own chapter where you essentially take on the lifestyle?
Well, we take on the symbols and shapes, so we put our own meaning to what is culturally familiar. So as God Squad, we wear a patch on our back. Our set of colours is based around a blood red cross. And God Squad's a pretty cringy name, but most things that started in the late 60s, early 70s we're all pretty cringy. But there's no doubt about who we are. Yes. Even last night in a kebab house, a guy came up to me and said, "Are you guys like religious guys?" And it still spins people out. But we are who we are, and we've never hidden that fact. And we've had to prove over a long period of time that we're genuine. And we've managed to earn that respect with the vast majority of people over the years because we have been different. Because we've said we're different, they expect us to behave differently. And we've come across guys who've they've not had a particularly positive attitude towards the church. And there have been occasions when we've been given a hard time because of what the church has done to people.
Yes.
So there's one particular occasion where a couple of us took a severe beating, and that whole incident was started because of a news story at the time. This is many, many years ago, but the news story at the time was talking about how a ring of priests in Ireland had been exposed for abusing children. And basically, we copped the beating for that. Yeah. You guys must be the same as that. And we had a choice. We could have. It would have been easy to wrap things up there and then. Yeah, it was one of the most humiliating experiences I've ever had, physically, mentally, psychologically. It really messed with my head.
It's traumatic.
It is, and it was awful. And but we had a choice. We could either quit, or we could, again, it's revisiting the Gospels, it's revisiting the narratives of Jesus and his teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, and say, okay, well, what does loving your enemies really look like? Are we prepared to paint a different picture of the church to these guys?
And what's the situation now then? Because I mean, when you started, when you started talking to, because the whole subculture is very clear. Very strict rules within the culture, but also very little tolerance for people that appear to be taking the mickey by setting up their own club, and especially a bunch of Christians setting up there.
That's right.
So in the early days, when you talked about becoming a patched club, what sort of response did you get from the other clubs?
Initially from some clubs, it was very much, we couldn't really care what you do because we don't take you seriously. We don't see that you've got anything to offer our community. Why would you want to live in our world? There were some that were a little bit more encouraging, that said, yeah, great, no dramas, do what you're going to do. There were some that were quite opposed. It's sort of, if we see you wearing your colours, your God Squad colours, then the term is to rip your colours. We'll take them from you physically by force. And
within the culture, there's little that is more humiliating.
That's
than
right.
More demeaning.
That's the worst thing that can happen to you. And so we weren't welcomed with open arms, and I think it probably took about 10 years for us to earn that right to speak. And all this time, people are watching. They're watching to see if you are who you say you are. They're looking to see if you're honouring and respecting the subculture that we're becoming part of.
Yeah.
They're looking to see if you're credible as bikers. You know, and I always said, you know, if ours are the only bikes outside the clubhouse on the coldest winter night, then let it be so. I don't want anybody to give us a hard time for not being authentic.
Yes,
in terms
yes.
of our, you know, our desire to be out on the bikes and ride. And I've done nearly 500,000 miles now, so I think I've.
What are you riding these days?
I've got a 20-year-old Harley Dyna, which is somewhat weathered around the edges, much like me.
Aren't we all? Yes,
creaking. So we weren't necessarily welcomed with open arms, but you know, I'm sort of now 25 years on. We're very much an established part of the scene. You know,
and it does seem almost as though you have become, and I'm putting my interpretation, so feel free to correct me. It's almost as though God Squad has become, in the same way that the church is available to wider society when wider society needs us, or when care needs to be shown. It's like God Squad has become like that to the biker community. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're very much the parish priests,
the chaplains
in this mobile subcultural parish of motorcycle clubs. Not just within the UK, but a wide network throughout Europe and Australia and New Zealand, and so we will be called on at those times when there's a crisis, when there's funerals, when there's sometimes some tension, sometimes they need someone just to be a middle person to sort some stuff out. We, or if guys have exited the club under a bit of a cloud, the club might say, can you keep an eye on so-and-so? We are worried about him. We're glad he's gone, but we're worried about him. Can you look out for him? And
that's a big responsibility, not just on you then. That's also a big responsibility on the guys who wear your colours and who have got your patches.
Absolutely.
I mean, and there's a factor in this, isn't there, that getting a patch, I couldn't just turn up to Zach's place next weekend and go, I bought a new bike. Sean, look, I haven't passed my test yet, but I bought a new bike and can I have some colours? I couldn't do that, could I?
No, not at all. It's a 3 or 4 year process. Interestingly enough, it's about the same length of time to be ordained as a priest or become join a monastic order. So that there's a process which goes right across the motorcycle subculture, because before guys are granted membership of these clubs, they're pushed to the limits, they're tested, every possible boundary. Can they be trusted? Do they carry within the core of their being the honour of the club they want to join? And so for us, we put our own meaning to that. We test our guys, and it's a period of discernment.
Yes.
You want people to be authentic and genuine in their calling. What do they really understand of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus within this subculture? You can't have loose cannons that are going to shoot their mouth off. You can't have people that... We've got guys within God Squad now that have come from some very traumatic backgrounds, some very violent backgrounds, and for them it's been a real challenge and a change of their lifestyle and patterns of behaviour. And where they used to sort out their problems with by clouting people and thumping people, they've had to change that, and so we've but we're looking for serious commitment from people. But we're a mixed bag.
And would you say it is like a religious order? I mean, you drew the analogy there, the length of time it takes to take on monastic orders. But
I think it is. It'd be an interesting study to do, actually. But there are a lot of marks of a religious order within God Squad, and certainly there's that level of commitment and a period of discernment before that, and an expected pattern of behaviour. But one of our strengths is that diversity of character and background and story. So when it's not a monotone environment, and so that
And as we said, sort of cycling back to Zach's place, I mean, the fact that the South Wales chapter, that the clubhouse is also Zach's place, your guys are heavily involved in the work there. Does that... Is it part of the fact that you have got a subculture group so clearly identified with Zach's place? Is that part of what makes it accessible for other people who feel excluded by society?
I think so. It certainly adds to the dynamic. There's often a heap of bikes parked out the front, and people wonder what goes on in there. But I suppose
for those coming in, it also adds a sense of safety.
It could do, but it could also work the other way. It could be seen as an intimidating environment. But I guess we've just been around long enough now for people to know that we're a church community. Yes, certainly it's helped. It creates a vibe which adds a positive air to Zach's place.
It's a phenomenal story, and many of us may well have heard of God's Squad and heard of Sean's story before, but to see the recognition of the need to connect with those who are excluded, to be a part of subculture, and how that has blended together to bring this shy youngster into a place where he is leading such a powerful ministry and leading such a powerful missional outlook within South Wales. It is a tremendous read. It is, as I said right at the beginning, it is a gut-wrenching and at times tear-jerking read as well, published by our friends at SPCK, and if you can get hold of a copy, then grab it, because they are literally selling like hotcakes. When we're talking, it came out just a few days ago and sold out already.
The first print run went within days, yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. I'm sure the people at SPCK are thrilled by that. I'm sure they are, but I'd like for us to finish. And we should point out in this, and you're not saying it, so I'll say it, that actually all the profits off this book, they're not going into your personal coffers. They're actually going into the work of Zach's Place to support people like Jenny, people like Mary, which is another story in the book. It's incredibly powerful. That's actually going into that, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Every penny.
I wanted to finish with a phrase, and I can't remember whether I picked this phrase up from the book or whether I picked it up from the sort of the press releases that came with it. But the phrase is perfect performance versus poverty of spirit. Okay, it's one of yours, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would like in our closing moments for you to unpack that thought for us, please. What do you mean by that, and what is your message to the church about the misfits that are within our congregations and the misfits that are in the streets outside our congregations? What should we be doing?
Well, I'll frame it as a question. What if it's not about a performance, a perfect performance? Because so often we know we're not to judge. We know Jesus has told us to love each other. We know, so he's told us not to judge. But so easily we slip into making judgments about where someone's head is at, about what their spiritual state is, how they stand before the Lord, what their status is in society. What if it's not about making those kind of judgments? What if it's about leveling the ground and looking at each person as an individual that's been created by God, and that no matter how broken that person might appear to be, do we dare to look at that brokenness to try and find the beauty that there is? And as I look back on my life, all the people I've spent my time with, I think some of the greatest acts of beauty and moments of beauty that I've seen have been amongst the most broken people. And I've learned the most from some of these people, more than I don't know how many sermons I've listened to. And there's a few I can remember over the years that have had a profound impact. But the amount of impact I've had from sitting alongside broken people has been colossal. Mother Teresa often used to say that the face of Jesus turns up in the most distressing disguises.
Yes.
And that's something that's become very, very special to me. And that's a tough call from someone that never used to believe a Catholic could be a Christian. And then there's a big turnaround there. So what if it's not about a performance? What if it's actually about finding beauty in broken places? And for me, the beginning of that road goes right back to the beginning of Jesus' ministry and teaching with the Beatitudes, which began with his words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."
It is a phenomenal book. It's a phenomenal story. And I heartily encourage you to read it. Not just because it's interesting, not just because it's entertaining, and it is very easily to read, and some of the poems and so on that Sean includes in it that he's penned, very powerful, very moving. But it's not just for that reason, but it's because the heart that God has birthed in him challenges the way that we react, not just to those who come through our doors in church, but to those that we trip over in our journey through life that are broken and that we think would never consider God to be relevant for them. Over 20 odd years, God Squad has endeavoured to make itself available to a community that many of us would think would never think twice about God. As a consequence, the mission is effective. Zach's Place has made itself available to people that society would reject. As a consequence, the mission is effective. I wonder if it's time we challenged ourselves that it's not about perfect performance on a Sunday, but it's about poverty of spirit that is looking to find Jesus in some of the broken places. Sean, great to speak to you today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paul, for your welcome.
You've been listening to Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond. If you can, why not join me next week for another one? Good night.